The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Greetings and welcome to the Personal Safety Show. This is Marcus Melnick from Firearm Mentor, your host. And truth be told, we did have a guest lined up for today, but unfortunately she was hospitalized, so we had to postpone the interview. So instead, what I'm going to do is bring everyone up to speed on what is happening in the world of firearms. First of all, I'd like to make a little bit of an announcement that on February 17th, 2024, I will be speaking at Purdue University for a TEDx seminar, and the topic will be overcoming the human stress response, or as I call it, overcoming the hot stress mess. And as I go out and do keynotes across the country, I will certainly let my listeners know if there are events that they can go to. This is one that they can go to, that they will have to contact Purdue University. Other events are more private focused. For example, a couple weeks ago, I taught a group of people in the elder care community about managing violence in healthcare. And that was more of a private event. However, I do these from time to time. I love going out and speaking, and that is what I've been up to. Now, as a companion, I am just about done with a new book, which is called Overcoming the Hot Stress Mess. I'm 98% done. And I hope to be able to announce in an upcoming show, either next week or the week after, where the books will be available. So, with that said, let's talk about the firearms industry, the firearms business. Now, SHOT Show is coming up. SHOT Show is in Las Vegas every year. It is the premier firearms expo for those who are in the business. So, dealers, distributors, new products are announced. And I'm not going to it, although it is a dream of mine to go. It is absolutely enormous, and there are everyone there from military contractors to regular firearms people from you and me, or like you and me. America owns a ton of firearms, and there was a recent poll that showed about 46% of Americans have a firearm in their home or on their property. And the statistic was obtained from an annual survey. It's been steady for about 2 decades, and in 1993 it was 54%. The survey also reveals that 33% of Americans personally own a firearm. It's noteworthy that the rates of gun ownership and the existence of firearms vary significantly among different demographic groups, different demographic regions, income brackets, and other categorizations. One of the most notable differences is geography. In the eastern United States, about 22% personally own firearms, where in the South, it's double that. It's 44%. And these differences arise from a blend of cultural and political influences. Just like it can be raining here and across the street, it doesn't have to be raining. Different parts of the country experience different things. So many southern states have higher numbers of registered Republicans, and it's a demographic that is closely associated with gun ownership. And 24/7 Wall Street reviewed the most recent poll conducted by polling agency Gallup, titled Household Gun Ownership in the U.S. Among Subgroups. So these are the Americans who own the most guns. Although a similar statistic, NBC had their own poll back in November, same types of questions, where they've revealed that more than half of American voters, or 52%, so you're talking 46 versus 52%, that's not a huge difference. So 52%, according to NBC, say they or someone in their household owns a gun, and that's based on a national poll. It's the highest share of voters who say that someone has ever owned a firearm in the history of the poll, which started back in 1999. So you're looking at 25 years. In 2019, 46% of Americans say they or someone in their household owns a gun. And in February 2013, that share was 42%. So it's fluctuating a little bit. And part of that are people not wanting to reveal that they own firearms. So in the last 10 years, there have been 10 percentage points of increase in gun ownership, which is stunning. And things don't change that dramatically and quickly when it comes to something as fundamental as whether you own a gun. So gun ownership, NBC reports, does fall along partisan lines as it has for years, although there are groups out there like the Liberal Gun Club, which I'm a member of, and I found that the Liberal Gun Club focuses on firearms, on training, on products, whereas some of the people on the conservative side of gun ownership, a lot of it's rhetoric, what if, the government overreach, the topics are blurred across politics. So it's not, a lot of them are not just gun groups, they're conservative groups. I really enjoy the Liberal Gun Owners of America group because they focus on the issue. They focus on educating others, which is absolutely tremendous. So lots of things have been happening. There's 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and also judicial. So let me tell you what's going on in all 3 different branches of government. Let's talk about Illinois. So there were guidelines that were approved recently covering how the state police will maintain and enforce the registry of gun owners who possess, air quotes, high-powered firearms that are now banned. So if you have a .22 LR long rifle gun that's in the shape of an AR-15, that's considered a high-powered firearm, even though anything less than a .22 isn't even really a gun. The requirement took effect on January 1st. People had to register their firearms, and there was a hearing of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, or JCAR, where the state police officials addressed issues raised by Republican legislators who opposed the ban, ranging from privacy to there's going to be a confiscation. Now, I don't know that there's going to be a confiscation. There's rumor, but these rumors come from rhetoric producing sources. So State Rep Ryan Spain, a Peoria Republican who chairs the JCAR panel, or co-chairs the JCAR panel, called for a motion to block permanent rules from being put into place. He did not win. He criticized the state police for filing their proposed enforcement rules too close to the January 1st deadline, which I actually agree with. I'm really quite frustrated that we could have approached this differently with a clear time frame and trying to resolve many of these issues much earlier on, so firearm owners throughout the state of Illinois trying to understand this very complicated and confusing legislation could have had better guidance on what they need to do. Registration remains open. However, if somebody registers one of these firearms now, they are admitting that they broke the law. We had until January 1st to register our firearms. That database is open for continued registration, which tells me that if Joe Stormdoor, I just made up that name, Joe Stormdoor says, hey, maybe I ought to schedule or register my AR-15 shotgun with a pistol grip, name a firearm. They do it. Guess what? They've just admitted they broke the law by not registering January 1st, which puts them in kind of the trick bag because realistically, it's a Fifth Amendment issue. And that's one of the arguments that is going on at the Supreme Court level. So, moving on, Don DeWitt of St. Charles said the legislation made criminals out of law-abiding citizens from the get-go, and many people on our side of the aisle believe it was unconstitutional going in. There were tons of hearings where gun rights advocates expressed confusion over the registration process, what the view was. For example, there wasn't anything clear until very recently on if a Ruger 10/22 which is one of the most common rifles out there. It's used for hunting small game. It's used for target. It's used to teach people because it's an easy shooting gun. It eases people into it. So some people said, no, you can't have it because it's got an external magazine. Some say you can. Some say you can only have a plain Jane version. There's just a lot of confusion around whether that is an allowed firearm or whether it has to be registered. And the trouble is, you've got non-gun people making gun laws. That would be like if I started to enact laws about abortion. I am not a physician. I am not a neonatal expert. I happen to be a gun expert. So, or I call it a specialist. I don't want to call myself an expert. But that's my area of expertise. I would not say to someone, you can or cannot do whatever you're going to do if it's not my area of expertise. I also have an expertise in safety. So personal safety, professional safety, workplace safety. So this legislation, I think, is ridiculous. And there were all these hearings. And the gun ban so far, you look at the rhetoric and it says, the gun ban's been upheld. No, the gun ban has not been upheld at the federal level, but there's legal challenges. There's no final decision. It hasn't been upheld. It just hasn't been overturned yet. So the gun ban continues, and state police told legislators that if it's deemed unconstitutional, there's going to be a policy for the gun registration data to be destroyed. Good decision. While the Republicans on JCAR failed to stop the rules from being put into place, they lost by a 6-5 vote. Bill Cunningham, Chicago Democrat who also co-chairs JCAR, said he was satisfied by the number of changes made by the state police and to their proposed rules. It's a complicated law. There's no question about it. So it's understandable that there would be confusion, he said after the vote. But I think there's been a good faith effort. I don't. But I think there's been a good faith effort made to try to address the confusion, and that's according to Senator Bill Cunningham. The ban prohibits delivery, sale, import, and purchase of a long list of, quote, assault weapons, end quote, in the form of certain semi-automatic rifles, handguns, and shotguns. Also banned are the delivery, sale, and purchase of large-capacity ammunition magazines of more than 10 rounds for long guns and 15 rounds for handguns. I did realize that somebody who went to Cabela's in Indiana actually got carded when trying to buy magazines, and they refused. It's a magazine. You don't need to have my ID to purchase a magazine. And Cabela's answer was, well, we do. That's a policy decision. So they're kind of in leagues with the Illinois legislature. People can get magazines. To say that you can't get a magazine, so you drive further into Indiana, you go to a mom and pop gun store, you go to Wisconsin, any other state, you go and you purchase magazines. I don't see how this law will affect anything. It is one state. It is a patchwork quilt of all sorts of gun laws throughout the U.S. Darren Bailey, who ran for governor, posted a picture on social media of sitting at a table, putting together a puzzle with his a firearm or two on the table. And Darren Bailey said, quote, I'll be here putting together this puzzle, waiting for Pritzker to knock on my door and take my guns. I will not comply. And he posted that on X, which is Twitter. So the degree of compliance is hard to kind of estimate, but through December 31st, 29,000 and change people have registered nearly 69,000 prohibited guns and over 42,000 accessories. And there's about 2.4 million FOID card owners, meaning about 1.2% of FOID card holders registered guns or accessories subject to the ban. According to the National Shooting Sports Foundation, a firearms industry trade group mounting one of the legal challenges, there have been more than 24 million so-called modern sporting rifles in circulation in the U.S. since the early 1990s, including AR-15s and AK-47s that are in the ban. So there is a state police website. It's isp.gov. FSB. So that's I as in Illinois, S as in state, P as in police, F as in firearm, S as in services, B as in bureau.com. That has a list of FAQs that we can go ahead and access. I wouldn't expect much out of it, though. In an article on January 4th, 2024, from the Effingham Radio website, the Illinois State Police will not pursue charges against residents who did not register their guns by January 1st. The Illinois State Police says the FOID portal will remain open and people can submit endorsement affidavits at any time. Residents who fail to register weapons that fall under the law could face felony charges, and that's that whole trick bag that I went into. So, I do not, until this law shakes out, if you haven't registered, I wouldn't register, but there's some issues that need to be worked out in the court level, in the courts. Also, talking about the legislative branch of government. There is an article that I read called For the Sake of Democracy. Democrats propose bill prohibiting private paramilitary activity in the wake of January 6th. So whether January 6th was an insurrection or not, everybody seems to have a different opinion on it. I don't think it was. Other people do. I wasn't there. Again, I have to rely on the experts who are the attorneys, the courts, and all that stuff. So, in response to this attack on the Capitol, or protest, or whatever you want to call it, whatever label you want to give it, doesn't matter to me, Democratic congresspeople have introduced the Preventing Private Paramilitary Activity Act, which is legislation that aims to establish federal criminal penalties for private paramilitary activities. This will apparently address a legislative gap identified by Georgetown law, which seeks to stop people from intimidating officials, disrupting government proceedings, and impersonating law enforcement. Now, I'm okay with you can't impersonate law enforcement, but let's be honest here, to quote my friend Frank, that's one of his phrases, let's be honest. Private paramilitary activity freed the United States against tyranny of Great Britain. So, it's part of the American culture. The militia is not the military. If you look at the original definition of the term, the militia are the people. They're the farmers with the flintlocks. They're the business people with the six-shooters. Those are the militia. The military is not the militia. Now, in modern terms, the military is sometimes called the militia, but that's a modern term. If you go talking about Bruin versus New York, which was the Supreme Court case that said you have to identify what the challenges are based upon the language at the time that the law was enacted. So with that said, regular people are the militia. All right, let's segue into the judiciary. When very early on in my career in public safety, I was taught by a police officer that everybody lies to the police. You've got the victim lying to the police because they want the offender to get a greater consequence. You've got the offender lying to the police because they want to get out of whatever trouble they're in. And then you have the witnesses who lie to police because it's the most exciting thing that's ever happened to them and they want to get on the news. Now, I've seen the first one. I've seen the second one. In my career, I never really saw witnesses lie to the police until now. According to NBC News, in an article a couple weeks ago, charges against a Chicago man dropped in a murder case that relied on a legally blind witness's testimony. This guy, Darian Harris, was incarcerated for 12 years because of this. So his murder conviction was overturned. He was released from jail. Prosecutors dropped all charges against him in a case that relied primarily on the testimony of a legally blind witness. Now, if you're upset or angry, I am too. How the heck did these attorneys not figure out that the main witness was blind or legally blind, which means they do have some sight, at the time? Darian Harris was in prison for 12 years after he was convicted in the 2011 shooting death of Rondell Moore, who was 23, according to the Chicago Tribune. He walked free, left Cook County Jail, his attorney reported. So, again, everybody lies. You know, I have a cousin who happens to be a minister, and he gave a little prayer before, I don't remember if it was a Thanksgiving meal, a Christmas meal, an Easter meal, something like that, where he basically said, hey, everybody lies. I've lied, other people have lied, and everybody lies. And I'm not proud of it, but it has happened. Okay, back to the judiciary. I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but these are all done in a specific order. Recently, the U.S. Supreme Court denied Illinois State Rep. Dan Calkins' challenge to the gun and magazine ban that included the questions about conflicts of interest at the Illinois Supreme Court. Now, some of the people who serve on the Illinois Supreme Court have received donations from Governor Pritzker. This is possibly a conflict of interest. And the Supreme Court's refusal to hear our case, meaning the federal Supreme Court's refusal to hear the case, does not change the fact that two Illinois Supreme Court justices who accepted millions of dollars in donations from gun control advocates should have recused themselves from voting. That's very reasonable to me. Calkins challenged the Illinois gun and magazine ban that went into effect, and after getting a final judgment in his favor from a Macon County judge last March, the state appealed to the Illinois Supreme Court, who sided with the state. So in April, Calkins motioned for the Illinois Supreme Court Justices Mary O'Brien and Elizabeth Rockford to recuse themselves. As candidates for the Illinois Supreme Court in 2022, O'Brien and Rockford's campaign amounts received $1 million each from Governor Pritzker and six-figure donations from other contributions from the Democratic leaders of the legislative branch. Illinois justices and the Illinois Supreme Court denied his recusal motion in May and heard the case challenging the gun ban law on the grounds it violates special legislation provisions, equal protections, and the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. The Illinois Supreme Court sided with the state in August in a split decision. Calkins then appealed the decision to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is taken up for consideration by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who requested a response from the state. The case was then forwarded to the U.S. Supreme Court conference that came before a motion for an emergency injunction that was denied by the U.S. Supreme Court last month. Monday's orders list showed the denial of the U.S. Supreme Court to hear the Calkins case. The denial of a hearing does not mean the SCOTUS approves the conduct of the justices, Calkins said Monday. It is not just that they received donations from gun control advocates, but it's also the exorbitant amount of money they received. There's no question they should have recused themselves. I happen to agree with that. The sum of more than $2.5 million in direct contributions and $7.3 million in indirect contributions called into question the justices' impartiality and independence. We're looking at our legal options moving forward, and we'll be making an announcement soon, Calkins said. Judges must preserve both the reality and the appearance of impartiality. It is impossible for these justices to be impartial after accepting millions of dollars in campaign cash from gun control advocates and after receiving the support of radical organizations like GPAC. I will not stop in demanding real justice as opposed to the rigged outcome of the Illinois Supreme Court handed down. There's a little bit of rhetoric in there, but I happen to completely agree with him. And Pritzker celebrated the decision on social media. Another attempt to overturn our assault weapons ban has been denied, Pritzker said on X, formerly Twitter. No matter the roadblocks, I'll never stop fighting against the gun lobby's dangerous agenda. Dangerous agenda is freedom. That's it. Folks, stay tuned for the second half of the episode where we're going to dive into some more happenings in the firearms industry. Stay tuned. I want my listeners to know that this is my dream, teaching people about safety. If it weren't for you, if it weren't for my listeners, I couldn't live my dream. So on behalf of my family and myself, I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing me to live my dream. And I also want to continue to live my dream, and I'm excited to continue to spread the word of safety. Recently, I began a new service as a conference keynote speaker. So if anyone would like for me to speak at future events, or if anyone knows of an introduction or would like to discuss how we can work with one another, I'd love to do just that. The keynote speaking website is www.stress2logic.com. That is STRES2logic.com. If you're aware of any conference speaking engagements where you'd like to have me speak, I'd love an introduction. You can always share my electronic business card, which is Marcus Melnick, MarcusMelnick.com. Now, back to the show. The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.